Episode 1. Prayer and Blood. On the outskirts of the grand metropolis, a humble, neglected church sat by itself at the edge of the darkness. This church marked the border between those who worshiped the light and those who were forced to live within the holy city's shadows. Cardinal Aubrey knelt there, still in his red and gold leather, his usually well-kept brown hair saturated with sweat, gripping a silver-plated oak cross on a gold chain. Splinters drew blood from his clammy, blistered hands, and it splashed on the stone steps leading up to the idol of his god. Looking up into the moonlight, his brown eyes seemed to have lightened in color. The man was praying for his sins and the sins of those he had ordered to their deaths. He prayed not for forgiveness but for forbearance against divine punishment. He lowered his head as he recited the Father's prayer.
Pater noster, qui es in caelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in caelo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis odi, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
I have always liked churches.
Thin lips upturned, a young man with smooth features gazed into the room.
A shame, really, that those who spread such lovely stories are usually the most hypocritical.
He looked to be just out of his teens, well-groomed and smelling of the overgrowth that surrounded the building. Grunting as he wiped his brow and pushed himself to his feet, Aubrey raised his head from his wet palms and gazed back towards the voice. He squinted, straining his vision in the shadow-infested hall.
How did you get past my guard?
You should invest in better training for the Templars of your church. They are not adequate to handling this rapidly changing environment. You never know what creatures lurk in the shadows.
Aubrey made a quick hand gesture, tracing an invisible cross on his chest. Then, turning fully to face the darkness, the young cardinal summoned a bright light into his right hand. He turned his palm toward his face and began praying.
Veni, Sancte Spiritus, et emitte clitus lucis tuae radium. Veni, Pater Pauperum, veni, Dator Munerum, veni, Lumen Cordium. Consoletor optime, dulcis hospes animae, dulce refrigerium. In labore requies, in aestu temperies, in fletus solatium. O lux beatissima, reple cordis intima tuorum fidelium. Sine tuo numine, nihil est in nomine, nihil est in noxium. Lava quod est sordidum, riga quod est aridum, sana quod est saucium. Flecte quod est rigidum, fove quod est frigidum, rege quod est devium. Da tuis fidelibus, in te confidentibus, sacrum septenarium. Da virtutis meritum, da salutis exitum, da perenne gaudium. Amen, Alleluia.
A furious glow of yellow and white energy consumed his hand. The cardinal focused the energy, compressing it into an orb, and thrust his palm toward the interloper. The fiery ball erupted forward, and intense heat and blinding light danced across the small, dirty hall, lighting it up like a miniature star. The beacon filled the church and spread through the broken roof.
Nice trick, you churchy types sure know how to put on a show.
He showed his sharpened canine teeth.
You realized that your light show does nothing to me.
The figure extinguished the light and heat with a gesture. Red pupils glowed in the darkness.
Vampires may not exist, but those old stories serve a purpose and spread like a disease among the common folk, and they help with the mystique.
He let a smile take over his face.
Whatever I am, I'm not a mythical monster.
The shadowy figure ran his tongue over his sharpened canines and then stepped forward.
I don't have an aversion to light.
It was an ordinary man with decent features that appeared in the light.
Oh, fire hurts and burns, but as long as I have the stamina and the time, I'll heal like new.
The radiance of the moon dimmed his eyes as he stepped out for the shadows of the small church hall. Pushing aside his dark red hair, the man stepped closer.
Anyway, you're a rude one. Cardinal Aubrey, you called me here, remember? I will happily go. I saw some decent-looking women in the tavern down the street. I might still be able to find a waitress and bury my face in her bosom.
He let out a sound of annoyance.
If you try to show off again, I might have to give you a taste of real power. Let's play nice.
Looking at the man guardedly, The cardinal allowed himself a stern smile.
Appearances are everything. Every moment is an opportunity to spread the mysticism of the church. Soon word will circulate through the countryside of a lonely church producing a gale of holy light.
The man spread his arms wide mockingly.
Stories of a priest praying in a small square in a teeny village just outside the holy city and bringing forth a miracle.
Cloaked in the night's warm arms, the visitor walked toward the cardinal.
You don't worry about the repercussions of your actions, do you? How hard they make my life, or that of my kind. You priests sure have balls.
Audrey's smile disappeared as he loosened his sharp tongue from its sheath.
You and the rest of the demon race enjoy preying on the fears of the people, even if, as you say, you are not monsters but men, created by other men.
The haughtiness of his voice filled the hollow church.
I know what you are. I know what your kind used to be. You are leftovers. A record of curiosity and scientific failure.
Leaning against an old oak bench, the cardinal continued.
You and your brethren are weapons. You are tools that were once used to carve a path forward. Instruments for the evolution of humankind. Nothing but stepping stones for us. Even if you are stronger and faster, it was our ancestors who made you. You are still nothing but a failed science experiment. I don't fear you or change. Evolution is natural, whether it occurs in the wilderness or a test tube.
He stood up proudly, puffing out his chest.
But enough with the small talk. I have information for you. My colleagues have been spreading fear and mistrust in the villages.
The cardinal's tone turned cold, and he slowed as he gauged how much information he should share here.
They are planning something, Leo. But I don't know precisely what's going on within the cathedral walls. Those morons have aligned themselves with dark powers and are corrupting, killing my beloved church. They are turning practitioners away from our traditions. They have built a following of ungodly radicals who terrorize the masses and spread their warped messages. They are undermining all the work my branch of the church is doing.
The cardinal sat down on a bench, looking up toward the altar.
I hear rumblings of the Laestrygonians being involved.
They are creating distrust. Laestrygonians are just low-level giants. They shouldn't pose a problem for your well-trained army.
A war is coming, and it must be stopped, but I am torn between helping the people and dealing a decisive blow to the enemy. The Firans is in the path of this surprise attack and weakening them, while also discovering the individuals behind the conspiracy is a tempting path. I ask you here, Liu, because your family at least pretends to be more moderate than the others. You have been known to protect ordinary humans who reside on your lands.
Leo looked the shorter man in the eyes.
A saint and a sinner.
The wind in the building picked up.
Willing to sacrifice innocents to find the snakes in your own house. And you call us monsters.
His laugh echoed off the hollow walls. Audrey reached into his crimson cloak and pulled out a sealed letter.
In here are plans made by high-ranking officials in the church. My colleagues have
A pause overtook him as he reached his hand out.
This is proof that they made a deal with the Laestrygonians.
Nerves made the clergyman's hand tremble.
Weak as they are, who the hell deals with those creatures? They might have been human once, but they're grown nasty. Flesh eaters. They'll cannibalize anything they can get their hands on.
Audrey wiped sweat and blood onto his silken robes.
They are ambitious and willing to kill for money and influence. In large enough numbers, they can still wipe out a population. Especially one that is not prepared.
He added abruptly.
Can you deal with this? My best priest and operative have been dispatched already, along with 10 of those paladins you are so fond of.
Huh? Paladins can sure fight. I know that from experience. They do not hide what they are doing. They accept their purpose. How can you not respect that? But why would you send priests into this mess? I take it you don't care much for these men.
They'll be fine. The most gifted of my underlings is with them, and I trust him to do what's needed. He will protect as many people as he can. The village is called Paulvale.
Leo sat next to the cardinal and stared up at the ceiling, where a faded painting showed a winged man brandishing a sword of fire and a spear.
Paul Vale is growing. Its natural resources are vast enough to compare with your capital's. Probably greater. Whatever you're expecting, getting involved in the holy city's politics will be a costly endeavor. You're going to owe me a favor.
Looking to his side over an athletically rounded shoulder.
One of these days, we're going to have drinks, and you're going to tell me how you lot pull off your miracles and magic without hurting anyone.
He added, smiling at the priest. Then he leaped up from the bench.
I'll bring this missive to my clan and my father. If the heads agree, we'll depart for Paul Vale with an army. Tonight.
Audrey looked sharply at him.
I know you're fast, but you're that fast.
I am.
Smiling as the shadows wrapped around him like a cloak and he was gone. Alone in the empty church, the young cardinal returned to his prayers, closing his eyes as he fell to his knees. The cold wind assaulted the foundations of the building. Audrey's legs felt weak, and the floor shook as the walls swayed back and forth. He calmed himself, focusing on his thoughts.
I hope my missive reached the Firen's lords.
The moonlight returned to its place, shining a spotlight on the altar. Audrey's blood spattered across it as darkness overtook him and his head was separated from his neck. The assassin departed with his trophy without ever being seen or heard. The cardinal's body sat silent, bent over, as the remaining sacrament spilled out. A lone raven feather lay atop it, and a cold laugh departed with the wind. An excited laugh echoed throughout the church hall. Cold bloodlust merged with the mild winds as the terrifying laughter drifted into the darkness, its frozen sharpness drifting out through the cracked church doors.
Tonight's a quiet night. I wonder when the cardinal's going to finish up so we can go home.
The cold, laughing wind reached the ears of the Templar guards. At the sound, the two exchanged glances and opened the doors to check on the clergyman under their protection. The first stepped inside and saw the body slumped over just as the sinister laugh faded from the air.
Holy shit!
His voice fired out of the church.
The cardinal's been killed.
The other followed him in.
Let's go. We need to report this to the captain.
They emerged, pale-faced and sick to their stomachs, and closed and locked the doors after themselves.
We are so screwed. The captain is going to kill us for allowing this to happen.
He's a reasonable man, but we're not going to get out of this one.
One Templar remained to stand guard as the other took off for the horses and the garrison. A smog-like film coated the sky, filtering the sunlight and moonlight and hiding the stars. The sun was setting, leaving the fields and forests to the harsh cold of night. The temperature dropped acutely, and solid frosty winds rose and pushed north toward the mountains. Small, abandoned towns lay scattered across the countryside. Travelers and exiles made homes in some of them, creating a network of ghost towns linked up by farms into new districts and city-states. On the outskirts of one of the last major cities toward the border where the eastern city-states began, a clergyman sat reading stories from a great, haggard leather-bound book. Then, closing it, he stood up over a golden flame, its bold light painting ash-covered shadows of the freckled children who surrounded him against the cold brick walls of the house. They encircled Father Alfric Canis like a colorful minstrel, weaving stories of mythical heroes and monsters for them. Dusting off his coal-black cassock, the athletic man towered over the children. Tying his long blonde hair back, the priest glanced over each child with watchful blue-green eyes, smiling at his young flock. Then he stretched his arms and legs and took a moment to observe the small but busy trade village. The quaint buildings rested in a field of golden hops hidden by hundreds of miles of dense forest and overgrowth, and beyond those, broad mountain ranges. The wind carried the dry sweetness of barley, overwhelming his sharp senses. Paul Vale, one of several upstart towns, had become profitable by harvesting the hops and barley for beer. In this rebuilding era, the trade towns acted as factories and distributors of goods to the major cities of the region. Local militias had grown into guilds and then private armies to protect the town's goods and manage the rich trading routes with the eastern city-states and the decaying western metropolises. The economic boom had created local trading empires that grew into merchant states. 850 years ago, Paul Vale had been a tourist hotspot on the borders of an independent union, a booming city of bright lights and art, a hub of decadence and history. 850 years later, only 30 square miles of it stood. The fall of an entire country had left behind marble and steel debris that still littered the once proud landscape. The streets and blood-stained walls of the destroyed cityscapes were laid bare, their dancing shadows burned into the surroundings. The landscape told lingering stories of a civilization lost in the vastness of time. Giant, mutated animals, survivors of radiation storms, prowled the edges of the fields for livestock. Many people of the countryside chose to fight Paul Vale's inhabitants, to take from meeker, hard-working individuals. But the locals rebuilt the city, one brick at a time. Clean cottages, smooth streets of limestone and concrete built by dedicated craftsmen, created a semi-modern quaintness. In just a decade, the city had been repopulated as traders, smiths, and artisans filled the homes. The shattered remains of statues were torn down and turned into the gravel of colorful walkways. Farms sprang up around the outskirts. Tapping into the river west of the town, farmers and smiths cut canals for irrigation. And now the golden husks of corn, barley, and hops shimmered when the filtered sunlight blazed above the fields. Life and a sense of safety and reassurance were returning to the residents of Paul Vale. Stories of the rebuilt town spread as people passed through the region. Tales of a populated trade city forgotten by time and rebuilt by refugees and artisans. The inspirational record traveled word of mouth, eventually reaching the western land's new capital, Civitas Lev.